Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending where you join us from. It's a pleasure to have you all over here for this Shared Use Mobility Center webinar, where we're going to be presenting our Mobility Innovation Guidebook titled Principles to Plan, Design, and Implement Innovative Mobility Pilot Projects. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Alvaro Villagran. I'm the Director of Federal Programs at the Shared Use Mobility Center, and I'm here joined by my colleagues, Alex.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Rosander, and I'm a Senior Associate at the Shared Use Mobility Center, and I'll pass it to Hani.
Hi everyone, I'm Hani Shamat, and I'm a Program Coordinator with the Shared Use Mobility Center. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So this is the team that put together this guidebook, and we're going to be the speakers for today's webinar. So I want to give you a brief overview of the agenda for today's webinar. We're going to tell you a little bit more about the Mobility Innovation Collaborative. That's the program that supports these efforts. Then we're going to walk you through the project overview, the process we took to develop it, the actual principles that we put together in this guidebook, and then walk you through on how to use this guidebook. We're going to have time for a Q&A at the end, but I invite you all, if you have questions along the way of the presentation, you want to put those questions on the chat box in this webinar. We can address them at the end of the session during the Q&A part. I would like to start by acknowledging and thanking the Federal Transit Administration, especially the Office of Research and Innovation, for their support in promoting mobility innovation in the transit industry, as well as the Shared Use Mobility Center's work in that regard. So I want to tell you a little bit more about the Mobility Innovation Collaborative. That's a program where the Shared Use Mobility Center is partnering with the Federal Transit Administration to provide technical assistance to transit agencies and state DOTs and counties that are developing mobility innovative projects. So we've been supporting them in advancing those projects and developing them. And part of the work we do with the agencies is to increase awareness about the developments in the mobility space, to facilitate knowledge exchange between the agencies and the industry as a whole, and to foster a community for transit providers to become more innovative in the way they conduct business. In addition to this project-based technical assistance work, the Shared Use Mobility Center also thinks about mobility innovation more broadly. And with that goal in mind, we have been developing additional resources to accelerate innovation by providing practitioner support to foster innovation independently. So we have been putting together some resources and sharing lessons learned through case studies. And we also thought about, okay, how do we expand the lessons learned from each of the IMI and NAME projects that are part of the MIC to bring those lessons to the broader industry? And we also ask ourselves, how do we understand and address the challenges that they have been facing in pursuing mobility innovation that could replicate or be related to other projects in the country? And lastly, we also thought about what do innovators need when they're thinking about pursuing mobility innovation projects. So with this framework in mind, we came up with this idea that innovators need a resource that guide their process, the tools, and the best practice to accelerate innovation at their organizations to better suited to implement mobility innovation projects. And something that I would like to emphasize about this project that SUMC have conducted is that we wanted to make this resource as broad as in scope as possible. So we always keep in mind the context and the needs for agencies of different sizes, team capacities, and operational contexts. So through the process of developing this guidebook, we keep asking ourselves, how this guide would serve to as many practitioners and agencies as possible, and how to support innovators working at different levels of organizational capability maturity so they can promote innovation in a practical way given their local context. So with that project overview in mind, let me pass it to Alex to guide us through our process.
Thanks, Alvaro. Great. So as Alvaro mentioned, we really realized that we needed to really talk to leaders in the mobility industry and understand their needs and hear about their experiences working on new mobility projects. And so we really focused on first data collection, gathering that qualitative data from innovators in the field. And we did that through surveys, a few expert interviews, and then conducting 2 virtual workshops, which I'll get into in the later slides. And then once that was done, we focused on the analysis phase where we assess the data that we collected, which really then was used to guide the research and development of the report. Next slide. And next slide, please. All right, so for the data collection piece, we really started with a survey. And so in May of 2022, we administered a publicly available survey online where innovators around the globe could openly and anonymously share their experiences working on these cutting edge mobility projects. And so we really wanted to keep this survey open-ended. So the survey consisted of 5 open-ended questions, really gauging respondents' experiences, challenges, and strengths regarding mobility innovation. And it garnered around 22 complete responses, and we launched it at our first Mobility Innovation Collaborative workshop in Chicago, and then distributed it later through social media and our monthly newsletters. And so a lot of these questions were really just focused on having them describe an innovative idea or project they participated in, what were some challenges they encountered in pursuing those innovative ideas, and really what innovation meant to them. Because as we can see across the industry, there's a few different definitions when it comes to mobility innovation. So you can move on to the next slide. Great. And then as our kind of second piece to this were our expert interviews. And so most of these interviews were conducted in May of 2022 as well at the first MIC workshop, where we also launched the survey. And we kind of felt that with so many industry professionals attending and attending our workshop and being in person, it was a great opportunity to really utilize that event to kind of have an in-person opportunity to explore what people there perceived innovation to look like. And especially since, the transportation landscape is kind of, as we know, ever-changing. And so, yeah, it really mimicked the survey in a lot of ways, but it was just an opportunity to kind of explore more in depth with having people in person. And then finally, next slide. We hosted 2 virtual workshops in addition to the survey and interviews. And those were convened in July of 2022. And we decided to purposely keep the number of participants in each workshop under 10, just to really facilitate better discussions, offer more interactive activities, and whatnot. And so in these workshops, we led 2 main activities that are intended to help participants think about how their projects are shaping the future of mobility and what tools or resources the transportation industry really needs to accelerate innovation on the ground. And so we used Muro's collaborative whiteboard platform to facilitate each activity. Our first activity was kind of a modified version of the game Cards Against Humanity, but we called it Cards Against Mobility, where participants were asked to brainstorm what factors and resources are needed for innovation at the individual level, the organizational level, and at the industry level. And then our second activity was more of a scenario planning prompt, where participants were asked to think about how each organizational role and function supports planning and implementation of different mobility products and new mobility services. And so participants were able to vote on a hypothetical innovative mobility project scenario, and then consider what support was needed. That would either what support was needed, and then what would maybe hinder the project as it got off the ground, and what tools and specific resources could have been useful in navigating that project's launch. And then I will talk a little bit about data analysis, so I'll pass it over to my coworker, Hani.
Hi, thanks, Alex. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the data analysis, and the key piece of that was affinity diagramming. So affinity diagramming is basically a brainstorming exercise that kind of helps organize and analyze qualitative data. And there are 4 main steps. The first is describing the topic and the problem and defining the source material. So basically gathering all of our data and setting up a game plan. The second phase is categorizing and visualizing the data. So in this case, in our case, it meant kind of making sticky notes for all of the survey answers and all the interview answers and all the topics and things that were brought up during the workshops. And we sorted them into different colors based on where those data points came from, whether the surveys or the interviews or workshops. And then third, we grouped the data into categories. So basically, if multiple data points kind of touched on a similar theme, we could kind of join those together, those responses together, and put them in, buckets. And then finally, the 4th step is to review the data aggregation and to generate ideas. So then the end process looked like this. So on the left, some of our data points are organized into categories, and the different colors determine or represent where those data points came from. And then on the right is kind of an example of some of our idea generation process. So a few things stuck out to us. Notably, innovation is not just technical advancements. It could be a change of process. It could be a different way of interacting with your team. It could be something else. It could be technology too, but it doesn't have to be. And then the second thing was that people in the transportation industry really need a resource that explains processes, tools, and precedents to effectively implement their innovative mobility pilot projects from beginning to end. So once we analyzed the data and determined what was reasonable to pursue based on our experience and our resources, we took the most relevant topics and we performed research to develop this report. The research partially drew on things we've learned from the MSc program, and we also followed leads from the interviews and from the workshops and from the surveys. And then, we also found relevant resources elsewhere. And so the research and development ultimately led to this guidebook, Principles to Plan, Design, and Implement Innovative Mobility Pilot Projects. It's a self-guided toolkit for innovators to accelerate innovation at transit agencies of different sizes, different capabilities, and different contexts. The guidebook helps with effectively conducting needs assessments, capturing the right data sets and the quality of data, and developing strong and lasting partnerships, and also connecting with other innovators for reference. So here's an example of what's inside this guidebook. There are non-sequential chapters. There's one for each of the 9 principles, which I'll get to the principles in a second. And each chapter contains some background information on the principle, 7 to 10 or so strategies on how to effectively execute the principle, 1 to 2 case study examples of the principle in action, and then a list of questions and checklists to kind of prompt team discussions. And then additionally, there's a resource section in each chapter with links to additional resources that are relevant and helpful for that principle. So here are the 9 principles. Just a broad overview of them. We don't have time to cover all of them, but we will highlight 2 of them today. As I mentioned, they're not sequential and they're not listed in any order of importance. So the guidebook is not intended to be read cover to cover like a book, but it should really serve as a tool to consult as questions arise throughout a project. So yeah, as I mentioned before, each principle has strategies, resources, and questions related to it. So if you encounter something specific to, for example, partnership challenges, the idea is that you could flip directly to perhaps Principle 4, the chapter on fostering partnerships, and explore some of the resources and considerations that you find there. So even though they're not organized sequentially or really thematically, there are some themes that are kind of shared by some of them. For example, Data management, principles 2 and 5 both deal with that. And then partnerships, principles 3, 4, 5, and 6 deal with that. Connecting with your community, 1, 2, and 8, and resource management, 7, 8, and 9. And then, of course, there are other commonalities between them as well. So I'm going to pass it back over to Alex to talk about how to use the guide.
Thanks, Hani. So one of the principles that we'll kind of be touching on today is principle number 2, which is reflect on whether technology is desired or required. And I think, as I'm sure a lot of you on the call know, technology is really transforming the way that we plan, design, and operate transportation services. We see some agencies are implementing mobility payment systems that integrate payment for multiple modes into a single transaction. Others are leveraging technology to improve the customer experience by allowing people to book rides and add funds to their trips via mobile applications. And so through our time, talking with innovators and also providing technical assistance to some FTA grantees, this idea of technology is kind of always been a component of a lot of these projects. And so we've kind of heard that yes, they can bring great benefits, but there's also things that kind of need to be considered when you're deciding, whether or not technology is desired or required for a project. And so when we integrate, new mobility technologies into existing transportation systems, they can also bring forth things that agencies might need to be wary of, right? That could include high implementation and maintenance costs of technologies, susceptibility to cyber attacks or software failures, privacy issues related to personal data. And then additionally, there tend to be concerns about how the benefits and costs of these technologies will be distributed, and whether certain groups may benefit more than others. I know, we've heard a lot about how when people move to maybe mobile ticketing or micro transit projects that utilize apps for booking, they can be really helpful and really convenient, but there may also be some concerns around making sure that unbanked users can still use those services, or that people who are older still have capability. Maybe they're used to booking rides via call centers, and so having to use an app that they may not know how to navigate can be tricky. And so we really wanted to emphasize within this guidebook that before you pilot a new product or service and introduce a new technology, that agencies really need to consider whether these technologies are developed and implemented in a way that is fair, that is broadly beneficial, and really mindful of the realities of how all users perceive, use, and access transportation services. I think, one thing we kind of wanted to touch on too was, innovation doesn't necessarily need to mean or include adopting new technologies, right? It could just be a change in mindset. And so we kind of started, in the guidebook, you kind of want to start with the questions to prompt team discussions. And so we've included a lot of different questions regarding, making sure that agencies determine the role that technology is going to play, really define their objectives up front. There are questions regarding, evaluating costs, the lifespan and sustainability of these technologies. Have you ensured that you've engaged users and communities within the process to kind of bring that technology on? And then do you have the required resources or staff capacity to maintain that technology? And so one of the examples we included in the book that we kind of felt did a good job at exemplifying this principle was Wake County Human Services, who launched their Go Wake Smart Ride program, which is a microtransit service in Wake County, North Carolina. It uses a software platform to manage trip booking and scheduling, right? And so they knew that a lot of their audience and a lot of people who'd be using this microtransit service tend to be older adults. So they partnered with the Camden Institute to actually create an adult education program to help adults with that lower technological literacy learn how to book rides, and just become familiar with the new app. So the program consisted of 4 weeks of training, and participants learned how to use the app, create an account, add funds, and use other app features so that transition was a little bit smoother. Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of a inside look into one of our principles, and I'll have my coworker Hani talk about a different principle. So Hani, if you want to take it away.
Sure. So yeah, I'll talk about principle 8, which is be creative with testing the pilot to get feedback and iterate quickly before full-scale implementation, which, we're jumping around, and maybe a little bit to emphasize the non-sequential nature of this resource. But basically, pilot projects are kind of by nature temporary steps towards larger or more permanent implementation. But even so, they can be really costly and really time-consuming. So there are two sides of this. There's resource management and there's iterating. So this principle goes over some strategies to soft launch or test a pilot, seeing if you can essentially prototype it to quickly deploy it on a small scale. And then, maybe more importantly, and because prototyping isn't always possible, it goes over the importance of collecting feedback, iterating, and refining quickly and effectively. There are always risks and costs with demonstration projects, but the purpose is to ultimately mitigate those risks and learn if a new idea is a viable approach to solving a problem. So iterating and learning and iterating quickly and effectively is really key. And planning a pilot so that learning and iterating are first and foremost in your mind can really help make it more successful, both as a pilot and if and when you decide to scale up. So on this slide are excerpts from this chapter with Copley Connect as the example, which was a 10-day pop-up pilot in Boston, which closed down a street in June 2022 and transformed it into a plaza space. And then I also want to bring up the resources that we link to in this chapter. I mean, these resources, which are on the right, kind of towards the bottom, the resources are part of our research on the topic after the interviews and the surveys and the workshops. So each set of resources might cover a variety of topics. And in this case, for example, we included the tactical urbanism guides, which might give some ideas on how to prototype, and also the NACTO guide on moving from pilot to permanent. So for all the principles, we really invite you to explore the resources on your own. They're all closely tied to the principles, to each chapter, and they all inform their development. And in most cases, they go into detail about a specific topic, kind of to a level that we couldn't really include in the guidebook itself. So yeah, I'll turn it back over to Alvaro.
Thank you. Thank you both, Alex and Hani, for walking us through the guidebook. I just want to acknowledge one more time the support from the Federal Transit Administration and particularly the team at the Office of Research and Innovation. We also want to thank very much the many practitioners who share their experience, whether allocating time to respond to the survey or to participate on one of the multiple workshops we hosted. And I also want to acknowledge and thank the great work in research and resources that other Federal Transit Administration technical assistance centers put out there, and also research conducted by non-for-profit organizations, sometimes foundations and private sector that inform and support this guidebook. Last but not least, I want to acknowledge the work of our former colleague Manali Sheth, who was also part of the team that developed this guidebook. So with that, we're gonna move into a Q&A, and I see here one question already on the Q&A box. Somebody's asking, who were the innovators who completed the survey?
They were basically from the public, private, nonprofit sectors, a variety of different companies or agencies kind of across the whole industry. That's the survey. That's also people who attended the workshop. That's also our interviewees. So we're really proud that we kind of got a big variety of mobility innovators to participate in this.
I'll also add to that we purposely try to have a mix of public-private sector, and get, we have very interesting, conversations, especially during the workshop, getting perspective from both sides, and also that was reflected in the surveys as well. While waiting for other questions to come in, I'd like to also ask you, in terms of the survey questions, can you tell us a little bit more of the depth of the questions, and like, were these more like a multiple choice style or open-ended? How were those survey questions asked?
Yeah, I can hop in on there. Really the survey questions were very similar to kind of the interview questions. So we're asking people, what does innovation mean to them? We realized for some people that it really meant incorporating technology into new services, while others it was kind of like it was more so addressing processes and addressing changes in organizations, way of doing things that, maybe that's just looking, maybe that was changing up their community engagement a little bit to make sure their services better, better reflected the needs of the people using the services. And then, we asked each person to describe, obviously, that innovative idea or project that they participated in. We recognized that, not everyone we interviewed was a part of maybe a specific mobility innovation grant program, or we're demonstrating pilot projects. So we wanted to emphasize that, like, that's not the only way to be innovative, right? You could just be working on a project of different sorts within your organization that's requiring you to think outside of the box. And then we kind of asked about what they feel like their team's strengths were, because a lot of times the people that you have on your team and guiding these efforts have a lot to do with outcomes and how they kind of come to fruition, right? And so we asked, like, how their teams use their strengths to facilitate this sort of innovation. I know some agencies had like really awesome like data analysis employees on staff, and so it made it really easy to kind of switch, if they were switching a platform that they were using, it made that transition a little bit easier, whereas maybe some agencies in smaller, more rural places may not have that capacity, may have to look outside for resources, which adds costs, adds time, which is why we kind of want people to think a little bit further about their capacity and their users' needs before really deciding that they're gonna take on maybe a new technology-centered project. I know, like, whether it's like working with a transportation network company, those things can kind of they seem fun and exciting, and they can be a little bit of flashy projects at times. But you got to make sure at the end of the day that it makes sense, and really hone down as to why you're deciding to go in that direction to begin with. And then more broader questions regarding, why do you think innovation is important? And what do you think is important to advancing innovation? And with that, we heard a lot about, it's important to make sure you really have partnerships in place so that, organizations, outside of your own, you have people to kind of root for you, and you have people who are on the same page who can, whether it's help with funding or just, provide that bit of moral support that's really important as well.
Thanks, Alex. We have a couple of very interesting questions also popping in the chat box here. So somebody's asking about, did we learn anything through the research about how practitioners can work with groups that are opposed to new mobility projects? And I guess that these groups, assuming it's the same question, the same person asking the question, can go the opposition from team members, so internally within the organization, and external partners.
Yeah, I can start on this one. So yes, definitely. We know that, building political support and building, community support is often a major hurdle that so many projects run into. So we heard a lot about that, and we talked a lot about that. And we definitely included some of what we learned and some of what we researched into a couple of the principles at least. Definitely principle one deals with building community support. And then I also kind of want to quickly, I'm kind of joining two questions here, but hearing about opposition from within the team, I definitely remember one of the workshops, there was a lot of discussion about this exact problem. And so we wanted to make sure to include something on how to build, basically build support within a team and build team capacity. And I believe we did some research and talked about that in I believe principle 3 has some, which is build a strong, functional, and creative team with the skill sets to implement and iterate pilot projects. That has some information on that as well. And I realize I'm gonna send a link in the chat to the guidebook so you can download it and read through it yourselves here. So,
Alex, do you have any further thoughts on the question of opposition?
I think Hani covered it pretty well. I think when you're having these discussions, it's just like framing is really important. And so finding similarities or things that like maybe at the higher level, it sometimes you could kind of see within conversation with people, it's like ultimately you want the same thing, right? Ultimately you really want to like better serve your users or whatever it is, but just the way to get there might look a little different. So just being able to kind of level with the people that you're talking to and frame it in a way that will resonate with them and based on the priorities that they've kind of expressed is definitely always helpful. But I would say, I think Hani covered it well. It's hard to, it's been a little bit since we've, worked on the guidebook. So it's hard to remember, specific things that agencies brought up. But I can definitely follow up after the call as well. After, looking through our notes and stuff. So.
Let me also add a couple of notes addressing that question. So one aspect that is always important, both for the community, like internal and external, is having a champion, right? Like a lot of back to this first question about who the innovators were answering the survey. Besides the fact that we try to balance, private and private sector. There is also a question of like who are the innovators themselves within the organizations. Some organizations, have innovators at the very top of the leadership, and that innovation comes down, from the top. In other cases, innovation, starts or emerges at other parts of the organization, and that could be the C-suite. Sometimes is just a regular, let's call it some, planner or some community manager, a customer representative for a private sector organization that, just hear feedback from a client or a community, and then brings that idea back to the organization to try to change things, right? And iterating, for example, software, for companies that provide software, like sometimes the innovation comes from not only hearing that feedback, but how that feedback is integrated in the way and the processes that the company implements. So back to the question about having a position, getting champions, it's important, and sometimes one way to overcome that initial opposition is to find the right partners and the right champions that could help you address either the internal or the external pushbacks against your innovative projects. And the other thing that I would like to mention that is directly tied to the way we thought about this resource and how to support practitioners is it's a questionnaire. So if you dig into this guidebook, you will see that the principles, as Hani and Alex mentioned before, there's some overview of the principles, some strategies, resources, and there is also a questionnaire. And I'm gonna stop here for a second, because the intention of that questionnaire that we included for each of the principles, is to provide a very handful starting point for whoever the practitioner is bringing these ideas to either internal or external audiences, their own teams or the community, and have a starting point to initiate that conversation that could go into assessing what are the pushbacks, the concerns of the opposition from the community, other team members. So this is one of the most, I would say, practical resources that we put out there to help the ones who are leading these mobility innovation projects to have to be equipped to address these topics with their teams, champions, and community at large. So we really hope that practitioners and users of this guidebook take full advantage of that piece of resource that we included in this guidebook. I'm gonna move into a different question here on the chat box. Somebody's asking if there are ways to get an idea of what innovative projects are underway across the country.
I can take a stab at that. So as Alvaro mentioned in the beginning, kind of part of this research effort really came out of our work under kind of FTA's guidance doing the Mobility Innovation Collaborative, right? And so I will send over, I'll put a link in the chat. But as you know, or as you may know, we work with a lot of different agencies across the board, piloting and demonstrating a lot of new innovative mobility projects, right? It could be related to novel data sources. It could be related to, like integrated payments, mobility on demand, like new microtransit services. And so as a part of our knowledge sharing piece within that program, we tend to write up case studies and brief interviews on projects and agencies who are part of that program. And so those are all available on our Learning Center website, which maybe someone could pop in this chat really quick. And so we do, those basically cover, history of the projects, goals of the project, dive into the challenges and lessons learned within those demonstration projects, and kind of just give more of an in-depth look inside into different agencies who are doing really cool things. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. I think we have like upwards of like 22 case studies just on grantees within the AIMNet program. So that's definitely one place that I recommend you kind of look. I don't know if anyone else, Alvaro or Hani, has any other places that may be good to check into.
Yeah, I will say that we are privileged enough to support the grantees from the IMI and AIM programs, but FTA has also put out other rounds of mobility innovation grants, including the EMI and others. So we strongly suggest you check the FTA Office of Research and Innovation webpage. There are other mobility innovation projects listed there, and if there is any other grant opportunities in the future, they will also be announced there as well. So it's a good website to keep an eye on and bookmark if you haven't done it yet. And then don't see any other question at the time here in the chat box, so let me go back to a couple of the questions that I have for you guys. Just want to have maybe share a little bit more about the process. I know that we talked about the affinity diagram, and definitely was a learning experience for us dealing, how to do that data analysis. Can you tell us a little bit more, maybe sharing the experience behind the scenes, about the iterative process that went into, organizing, those the feedback that we collected, and a little bit of making sense of the feedback that we received through all these different sources.
First, I will say that this guidebook was not we didn't have this guidebook in mind when we started this process. It was a long months long process of talking about things, throwing out ideas, basically workshopping, just internally with our team on what this resource might look like. And at times it was a very frustrating process too, because innovation is such a broad topic, and it's tricky to figure out what to do with it. I found the affinity diagram, and this is the first time I had even used one, and I found it very helpful to kind of organize thoughts. We had all these data points from all these different sources, and figuring out a way to organize them and basically visualize them to see what would come up was really helpful in figuring out what would be helpful to practitioners. Yeah, Alex, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I think that kind of sums it up. I know like a big piece was kind of, taking all that feedback and putting it into those, more umbrella categories related to, data management and partnerships and resources. But yeah, I think Hani, you covered it pretty well. I don't really have anything else to expand upon.
Great. I would just add to that. Hani pointed out the frustration that sometimes comes with it, and I'm gonna bring back the comment I made at the beginning. We really try to put ourselves in the shoes of mobility innovators, and just thinking about like every time that we get like some idea or feedback or resource that we thought that was useful, we kind of run it through like, okay, how this will fit into a transit agency of this size or in this context, and kind of trying to think like, well, this will fit here, this wouldn't fit here, and why is that? And that also created not only an iterative process internally to develop the guidebook, but a learning process of how sometimes even in the knowledge sharing process, finding the right fit or knowing who to talk to. Sometimes you find the usual suspects on one-on-one, like agencies of similar sizes. Sometimes you get inspiration from somebody who working in a small team came up with a very cost-efficient solution that doesn't need to go through a massive procurement process, and it could be implementable also at a large size agency, and vice versa. So a lot of our process went into just put ourselves in the shoes of agencies of different sizes, and try to produce resources that could fit and serve as many practitioners, communities, and agencies as possible. I'm gonna give one more minute and see if anybody else from the audience have any questions. Other than that, I will also emphasize the last aspect of this guidebook. I mentioned the checklist already. The other one that I want to mention is the great deal of resources that are listed on each of the principles. And Hani touched on this topic before. I just want to emphasize that a lot of the work that we SUMC did internally was to figure out what other resources were out there. And again, I emphasize the good work that peer technical assistance centers are doing, as well as research conducted and funded by private organizations or foundations. But the most important takeaway for you all potential users of this guidebook is we decided to provide the links to those resources without expanding. Just wanted to make this guidebook as light and as possible. We don't have a pocket version of this guidebook, but if we were to do it, the idea is for practitioners to have it easy to access, easy to share, and to start conversations. But for those of you who are more research minded and want to dig deeper into topics and want to take as much time as we did, thinking about these topics, the list of resources there will definitely guide your research and will lead you to great resources that has been put out by other organizations. So want to invite you to use this guidebook to the full extent possible and serving your needs. I've not seen any other questions from the audience at this time. So with that, we want to thank you all for joining us today at this webinar, presenting these principles to plan, design, and implement innovative mobility pilot projects. I want to thank again the Federal Transit Administration for their support. Here my colleagues Alex, Hani, and former colleague Manali Sheth for leading and putting together this amazing resource. And we hope that it's going to be a helpful tool for you all. Please reach out if you have any questions. We'll always enjoy talking more about different projects and how to support mobility innovation looking forward into the future. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good rest of your day.